Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the resulting energy crisis has brought formerly quite abstract discussions to the kitchen table, combined with an increasing urgency in the need to take action on climate change. Households of all shapes and sizes are fast emerging as a key hub for electrification and decarbonization. And the good news is there's a host of new technologies and business models looking to unlock the power of the residential market segment. Hello and welcome back to this third session of Roundtables Europe 2022. The title of the session is How to Decarbonize Homes Today. I'm Jonathan Gifford, the editor-in-chief of PV Magazine Global, and I'm joined by some of the leading voices when it comes to residential decarbonization today, including Insan Boy, the Vice President of Global Sales from PV module producer Seraphim, Syavash Kazemi, an electrical engineer with Norwegian-based electricity retailer and grid operator Tibber, and Wolfgang Gründinger, chief evangelist at solar company Enpal, Germany's first green unicorn. That's coming up in just a few moments. But first, let's kick off the session with some insights from a genuine leader in the provision of distributed smart energy solutions, and that's SolarEdge. Jaron Schächter is a vice president of strategy with SolarEdge, and it's a great pleasure to welcome him to Roundtables Europe 2022. Jaron, really lovely to see you, and welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Jonathan. Pleasure to be here, and very excited to share a little bit on how SolarEdge is looking at the world today and the challenges that we are seeing. So, looking at how to decarbonize homes today, I think the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, where are carbon emissions actually coming from? And if we look at that from a global scale, slightly simplified, what we see is that 16% of all global greenhouse gas emissions are actually provided by buildings. And out of the building segment, more than 50% are actually what we would consider residential buildings. Transportation is adding another 15%, and transportation has a lot to do with households actually owning cars, driving cars to work, driving cars for other uses. We have agriculture, which is one of the biggest contributors to global greenhouse gas emissions. And we have industry that is supplying consumers with goods and services, contributing about 35%. The building sector, looking just at German figures, if it wanted to reach a net zero target by 2040, would need to decarbonize by about 7 million tons of CO2 per year, or by 2045, by about 5 million tons of CO2 per year. Unfortunately, at this stage, we're not seeing that. And I think we as an industry, we have an obligation to help the whole sector to decarbonize. So the first and easiest is really what we would at SolarEdge call residential solar 2.0. So in the past, residential solar 1.0, you had your solar panels on the roof with your optimizers, with your PV inverter, and it may feed a little bit into the house, or it would feed into the grid. Now with residential solar 2.0, you have a lot more appliances. The world has gotten slightly more complex, but the world has also gotten more sophisticated. So now you have like a SolarEdge home energy management system that can take smart decisions between EV charging based on excess PV, between charging into the storage, between other appliances such as a heat pump or hot water. I would consider this segment to be the easy part. And we as an industry, we are often focusing on that segment, and there's a lot of things happening in that space to address the about 7.85 metric tons of CO2 per year. If we look at an American household, those 7.85 metric tons of CO2 per year, there are three really big things we can do to make that happen. The first one, big trend in Europe, but also across the world, switching fossil fuel heating to heat pumps. That gives you about 3.04 metric tons per year of savings. And if it's solar integrated, that's of course then almost carbon neutral. Switching water heating from fossil fuel to heat pump gives you another 0.85 metric tons, and switching 50% of the remaining electricity use of a house, and then that's easily doable with a SolarEdge system, gives you about 2.5 metric tons per year. The other side of the coin, I mentioned transportation, that's also very household related, is the average household can save about 2.86 metric tons per year if they switch from a combustion engine to an electric vehicle. Now, that's one part. And numbers for Germany look slightly different, but certainly here we also see that the EV in the future will take up about 47% of all electricity consumption in a German household. So long story short, in a detached home, put in a smart home energy management system, connect the different, especially large consumers, don't neglect the EV, and I think we're on a good track there. The problem is the building's emissions are not just coming from detached individual homes. They are also coming from what we call multi-dwellings, and about 40%, more than 40% of the buildings in the developed world, in the OECD, are actually in apartment buildings. And that trend is growing. By 2050, we'll have about 2 billion more people in the world, and we'll have an increase in urbanization. By 2050, almost 70% of the world's population will live in apartment buildings. And what we need to tackle here is that we need to find better smart energy solutions that can actually address that. On the left, we have a great project from our partners in North America, whereby every apartment was equipped with a residential style SolarEdge home system with EV charging, storage, and its individual PV panels. But if you look on the right, those high rises, we will need to see more BIPV. We will need to see different means to do community solar. So I think there's a lot of need for us as an industry to work together on decarbonizing this specific segment and not just focus on, let's say, the easy solutions. And then I mentioned that we should not neglect agriculture. Agriculture is putting food on people's tables. And agriculture as an industry is actually responsible for 22% of global greenhouse gas emissions and 30% of global energy consumption. We're seeing a big trend in agri-PV. We're starting to see a trend in floating PV. We're starting to see installations in greenhouses. And I think decarbonizing homes means decarbonizing households. So decarbonizing food production is something that is very crucial and something where we need to see more and better solutions. Last but not least, there's industry. The C&I space with the latest Ukraine development has certainly woken up. We also see a lot of development in that space, but we cannot just look at decarbonizing homes as one piece of the puzzle. We need to look at the whole puzzle. The puzzle needs to be integrated. We need to couple the sectors, and that's something that we at SolarEdge are working on every single day. So to summarize, grow the residential integrations, continue the focus that we have, but as an industry, look for smarter and better solutions for the cities, and also start integrating agriculture and industry into the mix. Thank you, Jonathan.
Jaron Schächter, the Vice President of Strategy for SolarEdge. Thank you very much for that presentation. And there's a number of themes that from your presentation I'd like to pick up on and look into it a bit more detail. So stick around for our panel discussion and we'll get into those in a discussion. But at this stage, thanks for your time. Well, I think it's pretty reasonable that the focus on digital technologies really comes into play when we're talking about the residential home. And as Jaron said, residential homes of all shapes and sizes. But as the demand, electricity demand within the home continues to increase to supply things like the EV, like heating, as Jaron was setting out, there's really an urgent need to fit as much PV capacity as you can on a limited amount of roof space, and that's where the next generation of PV cells and modules come in. Joining us to address this, to give us a bit of an insight into where the trends are going in solar module manufacturing and cell manufacturing, and also right across the supply chain, is Insan Boy. He's the Vice President of Global Sales for Seraphim Solar. Insan, thank you very much for joining us today at Roundtables Europe.
Thank you, Jonathan. Pleasure to join this round. Yeah, thank you very much.
No, it's a great pleasure. Well, please take us through some of the trends that you're seeing from the module manufacturer standpoint, and which ones you think will have the biggest impact in the market.
I think, as we have just mentioned, for the last 3 years, mono PERC technology, basically, I think we can move to the next slide, please. Yeah. So, sorry. So I just moved to the next slide here. So what we are seeing here is, there is a big trend how wafer, cell, and module capacity will increase, for the next decade. Okay, we will see a number up to 600 gigawatt on the annual capacity throughout these 3 supply chains. And of course, parallel to that, I think you will see that basically, bigger cell dimension. We are talking here the 182 millimeter and 210 millimeter will dominate the market. 156, 158, 166. I would say this is already belong to the past. And at the same time, new technology emerging. So PERC has been, dominating for the last 3 to 4 years, been replacing the old technology. They are aluminum BSF, and we are going to, I'm sorry, this is a typo error. We are going to see a TOPCon heterojunction coming, I would say, massively, and probably the slide that I'm showing here will be soon not representative anymore. We will see TOPCon definitely will come quite massively in the next couple of years. But at the same time, we will see also technologies like metal wrap-through technology and IBC will continue to develop as well. So on top of that, of course, we will see, let's say, power output will getting more and more. This is only as an illustration that we see, on TOPCon technology, either P-type, N-type, TOPCon in the combination with the singling, we will reach a module output up to 800 watt peak. But of course, this is basically reference on the so-called, a utility scale. But on the rooftop application, we will, of course, consider the smaller size of the modules. Yeah. So eventually, the cell efficiency will also increase to 26%. I think interesting here for us here to see here is, there is a publication that we know from Fraunhofer Gesellschaft, expecting like 12 terawatt will be installed worldwide by 2030. Look at the numbers that we are having now at 630 gigawatt, right? So in Germany, we know like whatever 1 terawatt hour electrical and generation will save you like 1,450 CO2 emission, while in Spain it's around 3,000, but it's depending on the country energy mix as well. Important that for us to see here is the materials reduction from 16 gram to 3 gram of silicon materials to produce a silicon cell over the last 16 years throughout different technology for thinner wafer, wide diamond wire sawing, longer ingot, and efficiency as well. We do note as well the PV system performance has strongly improved to 80-90%. And also, I think the local manufacturing will also take place also very soon in the next decade, because looking at the shape of the industry today, there is no necessity to transport large and heavy modules across the world, with that resulted in additional CO2 emission. Last but not least, I think it is good to see what is the status today. For example, for the carbon footprint of the entire supply chain, we compare the data from Fraunhofer Gesellschaft between EU and China. Yeah, I think China is basically predominantly still, we see a lot of still coal-powered plant. That is the reasons why the carbon footprint here is higher. And the next one is also the integrations of the materials, including recycling in the supply chain. Yeah. That's all. Thank you very much. I look forward for the discussion.
Yeah. Insan Boy, the Vice President of Global Sales with module producer Seraphim Solar. Thank you for providing that insight into some of the technology trends. So I think at this stage, it's really a good chance to assemble our panel discussion to discuss how things like high efficiency modules, smart energy management, smart metering are going to impact the residential solar segment. And as we've heard, it's not just the residential segment in single freestanding homes, but we're also talking about apartment buildings and other more challenging spaces as well. So let's assemble our panelists. New panelists or new guests on this session are Syavash Kazemi, an electrical engineer with Tibber, Wolfgang Gründinger, a chief evangelist with Enpal, Jaron Schächter, vice president of strategy with SolarEdge, and Insan Boy from Seraphim Solar. Gentlemen, thank you all very much today. Okay, Wolfgang, I think I'll bring you into the conversation straight away. As a participant in the residential space in Germany, I think there are many questions that the installation, that the distribution, the retail segments in many marketplaces throughout Europe, solar marketplaces, must address to really be able to deliver these kind of solutions, these smart energy home solutions. It's a very different proposition to just the straight rooftop PV system with a string inverter. You just whack up the modules in the inverter and away you go. Clock that those feed-in tariffs. So what do you think the industry needs to do to address this challenge, this more sophisticated challenge?
Yeah, in the case of Enpal, the customer relationship is even much stronger, given that we don't only sell the energy system, but rent it out to the customer over a period of 20 years. So 20 years, that's longer than most marriages last, right? And just like in every good marriage, the customer must love us and trust us. So we are working hard to earn and deserve his or her trust and love, basically, to provide the best product in the market. This product must be feasible and understandable for everyone in society, right? If you want to bring solar energy from the niche to the mass market. Just today, a study was released that only 16% of German rooftops have a PV system. So that's not enough. We need 100% basically. So what we are doing is not just renting out the PV system, the modules, but a carefree promise. For 20 years, that's the renting period. Enpal takes care of the system, replacing the inverter or the battery, covers all other repairs, and everything is included in the price with full cost transparency. So everyone understands it, it's simple, it's sophisticated, it's smart. The true innovation, though, is in the software, and that makes it much more sophisticated and much better than just the standard ordinary PV system. The software smoothly integrates all the elements into a smart energy system with a state-of-the-art IoT ecosystem and one of the top 3 best solar apps in Germany. That's already now the case, and new features of the software are underway. So it's like a Tesla, right? You buy the hardware product, the car in this case, and then in 5 years from now, it can do much more than today without any further effort of the customer. It's the same with a smart solar energy solution at Enpal or of other competitors.
Okay, Wolfgang, I'll jump in there.
The hardware is there, but it gets better over time.
Indeed. Okay, so it can kind of scale and meet the needs as you electrify more within the home. Jaron, I'll bring you in here. Jaron Schächter from SolarEdge. SolarEdge has been active in providing, software solutions. The SolarEdge app. I've had family members bring up their system and show me their charging over the course of a day and their electrical usage. What do you think then from the solar component supplier standpoint? Enpal is delivering that as a retail and an energy provider to homes. How the two different supplier, retailer are going to work in terms of scaling this solution?
Right. So I think first of all, it's our job as a leading manufacturer to work directly with our 50,000 installers across the world to make them better salespeople, make them really survive in a world that is getting more complex and have the right answers to the customer so that they don't overpromise, but really sell a solution to the customer that is an integrated solution. It's also our job as a manufacturer to provide that integrated solution. And like I said, speaking about residential solar 2.0, it's not just solar on the roof with an optimizer and an inverter anymore. It's much, much more. But at SolarEdge, we are used to having a lot of digital data points to provide digital services such as design tools and our Edge Academy to the installers. And I think that's why we're in a very good position to help everyone out there shape this transformation.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that, Jaron. Well, Insan, bringing you into the conversation, Wolfgang said that, you know, this system is, they need to last longer than most marriages. Modules, of course, need to stand the test of time, but they also have to meet the consumer demands, right? How important do you think things like low carbon footprint, like, you know, supply chain transparency, how important is that for the residential consumer going forward from a module supplier standpoint?
Yes, Jonathan. I think the first point about the carbon footprint reductions, okay? So this is what I have just mentioned in my slides, okay? Over decades, I would say, for the last 20 years, a lot of improvement has been done. One is the reductions of the material consumption, the reductions of energy consumption, and also looking into the sustainability, not only in terms of the material usage, but energy usage as well. So I can share with you, for example, with our partners in India, for the cell factory, we are looking also into the sustainability of the, for example, water recycling, okay? So I think this is one of the examples that you can do. And think in terms of the sustainability and on the materials as well. So, yeah, so I think this is, how to say, you know, this is a part of the exercise that the industry that have to go through, and yeah, we are looking into the solution as well. And you can see now across, how to say, for the last I would say couple of weeks, many kind of how to say announcement that has been made that massive you know, vertical integration supply chains will be installed. Okay, I think we are looking at the data like sharing to us like by 2030, we are going to see total capacity around 2 terawatt, 2,000 megawatts. So in compare of the current capacity, only around, I would say, 630. Okay, so this additional capacity, I think, you know, we know that more or less like 47% will come from China. The rest will come from US massively, 140 gigawatt, and India, Germany as well. Okay, so I think Vietnam, of course, I think some of the countries will come to look into the solution to provide sustainability in this entire PV solution. Yeah.
Okay, thanks you for that, Insan. Now, Syavash, you've been waiting very patiently from Tibber as a kind of unique player in the marketplace, retailer, but also a grid operator in some parts of the world or some parts of Europe. I think you're well situated to address another challenge, right? Once we get to really high levels of rooftop penetration, we heard earlier from Wolfgang the report, we're not quite there yet with Germany, but we are seeing it in some parts of the world. Then having all of this PV capacity, this generating capacity in the distribution network becomes a challenge for network operators. Smart energy management within the home so that everyone's not pumping their PV into the grid at the same time is obviously going to play an important role. But what do you see for other things like time of use tariffs or kind of more intelligent retail schemes for the customer?
Yep, correct. Everything you mentioned, it's a complex situation, especially for grid operators. So, I mean, we're not a grid operator. That's just the clarification. Here, we're a retailer and a BRP, and we also are an aggregator. And then, as you mentioned, there is more electrification, and then you have more generation and everything happening at the edge of the grid. So what does this mean? It's probably a problem for the operators. And then, but there is another characteristic that comes with the electrification and the generation, that everything is mostly connected. So actually we can have control on it and we can sense what's going on in that point. So actually it doesn't make sense not to use these assets located at the end of the grid. So we need to use them. Now, how do we use them intelligently? Number one, you can optimize locally for the home consumption. But number two, you should be able to consider the signals from the market, from the local grid, as well as the national grids, transmission and distribution, in order to adjust the consumption and the generation so it can in a friendly way get into the system and provide stability as well.
Okay. Well, and my apologies. Participant in grid operation markets, I suppose, would be a better,
you could say so.
better qualification there. Wolfgang, is that something also Enpal is looking at, aggregation of distributed solar assets?
Yes, indeed. And flexible electricity tariffs are super useful, both for the customer, him or herself, and for the grid as an entire system. I'll give an example from what we did just end of February when the Putin crisis hit in. Usually PV systems and batteries are not very smart. They are rather dumb. So on cloudy winter days, the batteries often do not charge fully. And in summer, the batteries empty in the evening and do not recharge until the next morning. And hence gas-fired power plants must be switched on in the morning and in the evening to cover the peak loads that happen at these times. And then more gas is needed to produce electricity. So if we manage to supply these peak loads differently, the demand for gas drops sharply. What we now tested is to modify the smart control so that the battery and the car would charge with electricity from the grid at night. That is precisely when there is a lot of wind power in the grid, but the demand for electricity is low. So the battery then can be discharged in the morning when the consumption increases again. And so that is super cool to have those both charging cycles, and that would reduce the need for gas-fired power plants for the peak load and make electricity cheaper for everyone and stabilize the grid as well.
Sure, reduce the cost of the electricity system as a whole. Syavash, what about then for apartment dwellers, for people who live in high density? Can these kind of tariff smart energy solutions also be applied to high density? Jaron said earlier, this is a really important consideration, the more harder to decarbonize residential space.
Of course, it can be done as anything, I would say. But then, of course, you have the residential like homes and villas, which have high consumption because of the EV and then the heating sometimes. And then for apartments, it depends how the heating happens and then how generation happens. But of course, you could use even wide appliances for balancing the grid. If you would be able to control, for example, a refrigerator. And if you sum up all refrigerators in a city, I can assure you that it's a significant amount. So it could be done, but then we need IoT. We need those devices somehow connected. And then if you look at PV, of course, if the building counts with PV, it could be done. But then you need somehow signals from the grid at that point.
And batteries, of course, are a distributed energy asset, and they could potentially be installed in an apartment building, even if there isn't perhaps space for so much rooftop PV, and become a participant in this kind of distributed, kind of orchestrated network, I suppose. Jaron, SolarEdge is actually has its own lithium-ion battery manufacturing capacity. You acquired Qualcomm some years ago. How important do you think energy storage will be? In fact, you're actually ramping up that battery capacity in Korea kind of as we speak.
Right. So our new Cellar 2 factory in Korea is in testing right now and ramping up. And we are all very proud of our colleagues that made a new factory happen. I think it's always a big step for a company. We clearly see storage as the key topic for resiliency in that energy transformation. You need storage on each level of the grid. You need it in that individual home to make it more resilient, to provide additional use cases such as backup or also time of use integrations. You need it at the community level and you need it at the grid level because that new situation where you have a higher fluctuation of renewables just demands storage, and storage is the answer. What we are also a very strong believer in is that the EV ramp up is basically just adding batteries on wheels, and that they need to be brought into the mix and into the fold of a smarter home energy management.
Okay, and then you have things like vehicle-to-grid integration. I suppose, how realistic is vehicle-to-grid? You know, it's a highly regulated market space here. It's also about how are you going to cycle this battery? How do you want to run your EV? Do you see vehicle-to-grid as coming soon, Jaron?
We believe that the first step will be vehicle-to-home. Vehicle-to-home, that's where the EV is really just a battery and part of the closed ecosystem. Vehicle-to-grid will happen as well, and there are some amazing pilots running all over the world. But that's probably further off because you need to solve the orchestration on a different scale.
Okay, all right. Anyone else would like to jump into that? Wolfgang, I saw you were nodding quite vigorously.
Yeah, like bidirectional charging will be the future of e-vehicles because it's a mobile battery, and all the mobile batteries connected to an ecosystem that will enable the renewable energy system to become much stronger and much more resilient, and in particular much more reliable. And I see totally what Jaron said, right? The mobility revolution is happening right now as we speak. It's an exponential growth of e-vehicles and of wall boxes and charging stations. For instance, our customers, although they don't have an e-vehicle yet, they select the wall box as an element in their package, energy package solution. 85% of the customers select the wall box. So that's huge. That's a huge number, and almost everyone takes a storage battery. So people know that what lies ahead, and they prepare for the renewable energy future to come.
Okay. Well, I know that there's also a bit of a split in the market that making or supplying a smart energy home package, you can either have various component suppliers or an entire kind of ecosystem. SolarEdge, for one, does supply this with EV charging, as I mentioned, battery storage, solar inverters and optimizers, these kind of things. Jaron, I think I'll put it to you. What's the case for having this fully integrated system from the one supplier?
I think just ease of mind, and is probably a key topic. Also, different use cases that can be built just in a better fashion if you control the full ecosystem. But if I just take the consumer perspective, I've just charged my EV for free purely on excess solar, and if I do take the feed-in tariff that I lost, then I charged my EV for about €3.60. To do a full drive this evening.
Okay, all right. And Syavash, from Tibber, you're familiar with kind of integrating various devices within the home and kind of orchestrating, make things sing in tune. Which do you see as being the most attractive for the consumer?
Yeah, I totally agree that there should be one player kind of controlling what you have at home. And we think we're suited for that, considering that we are the ones that provide electricity to the customer. So then it makes kind of sense to let the provider of electricity to control and have an overall view of your home, but also have a look at the market. And I think that this part is usually mislooked. And I think it's very, very important to also have a vision of what's going on in the market, in the system. And then you can take advantage not only of providing services, so your assets are providing services to the grid and helping it be more stable, but also you can take advantage of markets and bring value to the customer so they can get a return on their investment even faster. And at the same time, making the system more reliable.
Yeah, but turning the attention to Europe, European marketplaces are highly regulated, though, and everyone is very different.
Yes.
Tibber, you're in 4 markets. It must take a long time to go from one to the other, right?
Yeah, it takes a long time and a lot of know-how. And for sure, we need new regulations that allow for aggregations to not only provide services to the transmission system operators, which is an option now in some markets, but also to the distribution side. And that's in discussion in many markets, but I think it's going to happen eventually. Great companies know about this, and they are pushing it through pilots and that kind of stuff. But yes, it's going to happen. I think it's just a thing of time.
Indeed. Okay, well, all of this discussion today is kind of powered by PV becoming cheap enough for so many residential consumers and also powerful enough to be able to power a residential home. We've touched a little bit on apartment buildings, on multi-family households. Let's look a little bit further into it. Jaron, you mentioned that BIPV might be an option. I want to put that across to Insan, coming from the module supplier segment. Do you really see BIPV as something that could help power modern apartment buildings, in our cities?
Certainly. I mean, in terms of technology, certainly is the case, Jonathan. But the question is, how do you bring the products to mass productions and affordability, right? So, but I think the last 20 years, the crystalline silicon technology has shown us in the industry that is the way, that is the other way around. Okay, so I'm not sure if you guys can see me. I think my voice is lagging here.
No, we can hear you, Insan. It's good.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm sorry for the internet connection here because I'm in Indonesia right now. So yeah. So I mean, from our side, we are focusing, as I mentioned earlier, we are focusing on better technology, better efficiency cell, but of course, to focus on affordability and competitive, pricings of the product also in the market. We know the challenges that we are facing nowadays. We have high energy pricing. We have very high demand across the various, supply chains in this industry. Basically, we know that the demand of the PV modules, for example, in this year is surpassing the supply and also the availability, and it still remains a challenge. Okay, I think in the sector of in the residential sector, it is still easier to cope with, rather in the utility scale projects. But again, looking forward, I think with the massive expansions of the entire supply chains that we have just mentioned, about up to 2,000 gigawatt in 2030, I think that definitely the industry will improve the cost performance as well. Yeah.
So we've got these kind of dual factors playing out that we need to accelerate the provision of solar to residential homes, but we're in an increasing price environment. That also applies for modules, but also batteries. Yes, Insan?
Yeah, but I think, Jonathan, we have to look into let us look in the past data. Okay, we know that every time when the capacity double, you see a certain percentage of the cost reduction as well. So hopefully this is more or less like, I'm not sure this is what we can say similar to the Moore's law in the semiconductor of this is applied to the solar industry in terms of the costing. Yeah.
Okay, let's hope the learning curve continues. It probably should, one would think. Also, prices for batteries, we're hearing there's a lot of pressure on that as people are adopting EVs in big numbers. Demand for lithium-ion batteries are very high. Jaron, looking at this high-density space or sub-segment of the residential segment, you showed in your presentation what looked like a really cool project from the US where you were able to provide individual inverters for each of the apartment dwellers. Beyond that, or can you tell us more about that first of all? And what other solutions do you see as being key to really decarbonizing high density?
Right. So first to also just correct the misconception, we expect that the first part of that segment of multi-dwellings will be driven by very classic technologies, standard modules, standard inverters, but it will be a different mix. So you will have your standard modules, but maybe you have a commercial inverter, maybe a 30 kilowatt block, because you have a different roof space. And then you will start to see community solar and buildings connecting with each other. And maybe there's a centralized heat pump, or maybe there's a centralized warm water production. And that can act as basically an energy sink or some type of storage as well. So I think the first wave that we are seeing is really being driven by existing building blocks. But we get more and more requests for also new building blocks that are addressing this segment. And then when I look at the mega cities, that's where BIPV and others will need to come into play. Otherwise, it's not going to work. That specific project in the US is a company called Pearl X. They are specialized on what I would call garden-style developments, on really neat apartment environments. And they work with a company from out of New York called David Energy. And together they provide the full package whereby every apartment is getting a full SolarEdge system. It's the same system that a single house would have. It has an EV charger. On the roof, you have centralized solar, but it's feeding into individual inverters and batteries. And then you also have a time of use tariff and VPP service as part of the full offering. So it's really a complete renewable energy solution that they provide to the individual owners of these kind of developments.
Okay, and also provides that relationship with the consumer as well, which is similar to Enpal and Tibber that you're doing. So you'll be able to monitor your system on your app and as a consumer modify your behavior or really have play a role in decarbonization. And I think that's a really important message for residential decarbonization, right? Like utility scale is so important, industry is so important, agriculture is so important, but it's also a segment in which individual consumers and households can make a difference, right? And I think that's a really powerful message that we as an industry can really tell consumers that you might despair about climate change, but take action into your own hands. Is that, Wolfgang, what you're hearing from Enpal customers, that they're making this switch because they want to make a difference?
Yeah, yes, indeed. So everyone knows they should do something about the climate, but they don't know how. And now, first time, they can easily participate in the energy transformation and become part of a larger movement. And that's really like freeing them and making them feel very special and in particular, so that they can really now also shape the future and protect the climate for their children. So make it easy for people to participate and to become independent from fossil fuels, to save money with rising energy prices for their heating, for their mobility, for the electricity, and protect the climate for their children. That's a big motivator.
And I guess in 2022, interest has never been higher. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your participation in our discussion today. I think that was really worthwhile. Insan Boy from Seraphim Solar, Syavash Kazemi from Tibber, Wolfgang Gründinger from Enpal, and Jaron Schächter from SolarEdge. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining Roundtables Europe 2022. Well, now we're going to take a short break, thankfully a short break for me as well, and it gives you a chance to explore the expo area on this event app. We've got loads of great partners who are sharing industry information. There's speed networking and also a host of side events and panel discussions throughout the day that you'll be able to be involved with. So I really encourage you to get involved and take part in Roundtables Europe, not only here on the main stage, but right across this event platform. Then back at 2 p.m. Central European Summertime, we'll have session 4 of our event, which is Made in Europe, Bulking Up and Building Out, where we look at manufacturing in Europe, a theme that we've already addressed quite a lot in these sessions today, but we're going into much more detail as to how that can really be executed, what technologies, policy and finance will be required. But until then, I'm Jonathan Gifford. Thanks for joining this Decarbonize Home session at Roundtables Europe 2022.